World Championship Wrestling. Now let me tell you a bit about Chris. Brace yourself, because this guy is not passionate about quality when it comes about the products, but also about people and processes. You might already be familiar with Chris, as he's a co-host and highly popular podcast Testing Peer. But that's not all. He's also the co-host a monthly YouTube stream called 9 out of 10 Testers. Trust me, there are no questions too tricky for Chris to tackle. By the way, if you are curious about the Eurovision Song Contest, Chris is person to go. So Chris' presentation is going to take around 35 minutes, and we encourage you to share your questions in the app. Remember, there's no question too big or too small for Chris. Now let's give a big applause to Chris Armstrong. The stage is yours, come on!
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
What? A very, very important request. If I can I encourage some of you to come just a little bit closer? Only because I like to see your faces a little bit when you see me. Is there anybody who's a little bit further back? Do you mind coming a little bit further forward? And whilst you're doing that, I'm just going to... This is the About Me slide. This is the moment when I get to just calm myself. That's very close accent, thank you. I'm not sitting on the stage just yet. So, for me, as Gosha kindly said, I like things, many things. I've had many job titles. All these words have been in my job title over the years. I hope you can read them and probably think some of them sound a bit silly, because job titles for testers kind of are. I present the Testing Peers podcast with some wonderful friends. We also have a little community. We speak to universities and we sort of advocate for testing. And hopefully, we will start a conference one day, Russell.
Yes.
And yeah, EuroSTAR, you are free to sponsor us. Thank you. We do the 9 out of 10 testers panel. I don't know if any testers here like to complain about things. Yeah? Okay. Come to our panel tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Join the fun. I'm an Agile Testing Fellow. I am the conference leaderboard winner at the moment. Please be me. I don't want to actually win the competition. I'm just here to help and get some communication going. I enjoy the conference experience, and I like all of these other things. You are very welcome to talk to me about literally anything. So, okay. So you've read my abstract, and you're intrigued. How can you possibly tell me a relevant story that's relevant in a testing context about pro wrestling? Now, does anyone here, and I'm going to encourage a little bit of audience participation, can you shout to me one word you think of when I say pro wrestling?
Fake.
Home. Fake?
Oh.
Acting.
Because the suspension of disbelief is what we have with wrestling. Wrestling is storytelling. It is a show, it is entertainment. These are people who put their bodies on the line to entertain you. And whilst you watch it, you need to remind yourself, what I'm watching isn't real, even if what they're doing is real. I don't think this would be in a real fight. But my goodness, are they very agile. That's modern wrestling, friends. But pro wrestling in the 1990s was a little bit different. We had some big men who may have had performance enhancing drugs. Of course, kind of lost their battle because they decided not to call themselves a real sport. And they called themselves entertainment. And they killed many years' worth of an industry where they tried to sell it as real. To the point where there was a man named the $1 Million Man who wasn't at all a millionaire, but he got to expense private jets and private limousines to his employer just so people in the real world would actually think this very rich man was a wrestler. Just to contrast on our last introduce you to World Championship Wrestling and a little bit broader context around the time that we're talking here. And I'm going to give you 4 stories. I had 12, but I'm not allowed that now. And I'm going to give some lessons learned from those stories and how they might actually apply to us in software development. And then I'll just hammer those home, so hopefully you actually remember what I've been talking about. So, WCW. I'm going to take you back to 1991. I live in a tiny village in Cambridgeshire called Linton. It's famous only for a British comedian character called Alan Partridge, who lived in Norwich, worked in London, and Linton was equidistant. It has a zoo. Not very much else was happening there, but a little 7-year-old boy was watching pro wrestling with his brother. We watched it, and these big American superheroes are on the telly. So much fun until we turn it off, and my brother picks me up and says, "Let's wrestle!" Okay. So here's your context. In the 1980s, pro wrestling in the United States was regional. That meant every kind of major region in the United States where they had a television network, they also had a pro wrestling organisation. And big name wrestlers would tour around the country, but each organisation stayed put. And there was an agreement. Do we think that agreement lasted? Do people get greedy? Did anyone see Salah's talk earlier? People get greedy. And a certain World Wrestling Federation, led by Vincent Kennedy McMahon, he got extra greedy and he started to acquire the best wrestlers. Anyone heard of Hulk Hogan? He moved after he was Thunderlips, but he was a very famous man before then. He was a giant of a man, and he got acquired aggressively by the World Wrestling Federation, and they continued to grow. At the same time, World Championship Wrestling changed into World Championship Wrestling from Jim Crockett's promotions, which was previously Georgia Pro Wrestling. And they were acquired by Television Network. Now, World Wrestling Federation were family-owned wrestling, brought a third-generation-led company. World Championship Wrestling were owned by Turner Network Television. Anyone who lives in the UK knows that now that's going to be our BT Sports. But TNT had Cartoon Network, that's CNN. It was a huge conglomerate, and they were making television shows. They acquired a man by the name of Eric Bischoff, who has a bigger ego than most. He rose very, very quickly and was rewarded, and he became Senior Vice President in 1994, taking full control. His first job was to cut costs, because they were bleeding money. He moved them to Disney World. I can't imagine working at Disney World as exciting as going, but there we go. And of course, they acquired Hulk Hogan and the aforementioned Macho Man Randy Savage. That's your context. So, let's move on to story number 1, TV first. Now, as I said, World Championship Wrestling was owned by a television network. So, what do you think television networks care about?
Money.
Ratings, which equals advertising, which equals money. Do you think people, advertisers, think of wrestling as something they want to associate themselves with? This is just after the steroid trials in the United States. But they had the advantage of having one very rich man who was a fan of wrestling owning the company. And so what happened was, he asked Eric Bischoff, how do we make our company a success? And he said, let's go head to head with the competition. Direct head to head, knowing that he had in his back pocket the owner, and therefore he had the money. So they went head to head with the World Wrestling Federation, who already had what still remains to this day the longest running episodic television show in American television history. As you can see, it's just past 30 years. Every single Monday, including Christmas. No, thank you. So Nitro went ahead. They debuted in the Mall of America in Minneapolis. And they debuted live. So we have key contrasts. World Wrestling Federation used to cut costs by recording after a live show. So they had 2 shows for 2 weeks, but they only recorded every 1 week. So WCW had an advantage, a shock factor. They also were on, I'm going to get this right around because there's an acronym that helps me. They were on network television rather than cable television, which meant they had a greater reach suddenly in this new national world. And they decided television was the jugular, the measure of success that they would go by. And you know what? They managed eventually to have a winning streak of 83 weeks when they won the Nielsen television ratings in their head-to-head running. But this is a story about how WCW made mistakes. They failed to scale and they were sold to their competition for only $4 million in 2001. So that tells me something, that maybe the success they were measuring wasn't the right thing. I'm going to go for a little bit more interaction here. Has anyone ever measured something and thought they were doing well? Have you ever maybe discovered that there were things you weren't doing well, but because you were focused on that good stuff, came beneath you? Yeah. This happens very often. I used to work in a company where our project manager had one measure of success. Automation runs and hits 95%, and we ship it. And yeah, I mean, sounds like a great idea, but what about that 5% that fails? Like, downloading the new firmware. Oh, you know, maybe we've had a new functionality. Are we actually covering the right thing, let alone measuring the right thing? Have you had a coverage conversation with your colleagues where you've said, I don't think measuring code coverage is the only metric we should have? What other kinds of coverage should we be looking at? Risk? Requirements? Meeting user profiles? All these things. Are we aware of those other bits? Or are we just focusing on one good thing because that's where we're getting a pat on their back? And believe me, Eric Bischoff got a pat on his back. He was a television executive who had a private jet because he was getting rewarded by the metric that he was set. Are we measuring the right thing? Number 2, and rather unfortunately, as with happening, the image is a little bit over the words, but you can read it because it's basically the same thing. New World Order. Now, anybody who knows Hulk Hogan, post-1996, will have heard of the New World Order. Anyone heard of him? Oh, wrestling fans, my people. What happened in 1996 was a couple of pro wrestlers from the World Wrestling Federation couldn't be paid enough money by their current organisation, and so they were released from their contracts. And they turned up invading the opposition. This was a new way of presenting a story that had not been seen in United States pro wrestling before. It was stolen, I might add, the idea, from our friends in Japan. Because in Japanese wrestling, they kind of are the pioneers of all the cool stuff. And so the idea was, some bad guys come to take over our story, and the children who loved Hulk Hogan, who had been what is called a white meat baby face in America, a permanent, sickly, sweet good guy, he turned his back on the children of America. And he turned to the dark side, the New World Order. Now, he wasn't the free agent, he was merely the mysterious insider. But what they did is they changed the track of storytelling Prior to this, numbers, advertising numbers, fans, young children like myself were beginning to switch off because the story that was being told was the same old S word. It was boring, very many, as you can see from here, colourful, cartoon character people, and they weren't interesting, they were not compelling. And so this new thing happened, and it was exciting. And they appealed to a new audience, which is fantastic. Lightning in a bottle. So when you strike lightning in a bottle, you just keep on doing that, right? Now I've put this up because it's confusing and it's contradictory. Because here, Einstein is telling us that by doing the same thing over and over again, we expect different results. But in the world of our work, if I only test the same things forever, am I actually, and by test I'm really talking about check here in case we're having that word testing, checking debate. If I only ever do the same thing over and over again, and we are continuing to develop and change our things, the value of my testing, the information it provides, it decreases over and over again. So I quote somebody else famous who had a beautiful slide for me to use. John F. Kennedy. Time in the world did not stand still. Change is the law of life. Now, has anyone heard of a little company called Netflix?
Oh, the DVD rental.
They did DVD rental. And they were offered at a very small price to a little company called Blockbuster. But Blockbuster were like, our model, it works, we're successful, we don't need you. People want to come to the shop, people want to choose our stuff, they don't want the convenience of just clicking on something and it showing up at their door. What a stupid model. Of course, Blockbuster is now a satirical comedy on Netflix. Now, story number 3, the cruiserweights. Who knows combat sports? Yeah? We put people who are like similar size up against each other. Pro wrestling likes to kind of just kick with that sort of stuff, but they like names. They call their big champion the heavyweight champion of the world. And then they come up with millions of other belts, because more titles means more good. But anyway, in the old days, it was tag team champions, where you have 2 people versus 2 people. You had the heavyweight champion of the world, who were these giants. And sometimes you had a women's champion. I've got a sad story to tell you about women in World Championship Wrestling. They had a champion for about that much time. Very disappointing. But also, WCW started something called the Cruiserweight division. Now, what do you imagine when I say cruiserweights in terms of wrestling? You're imagining there's going to be another gift race. Alright. That is Jushin Thunder Liger, and he only retired this year in his 50s. Anybody here think that they could do that in their 50s?
Couldn't do that in my
This is the
20s.
beauty of what is called the undercard. Smaller, more agile, faster moving, quicker stories told to open the door to the audience. It was new, it was exciting. And has anyone here this week heard anything about representation? Suddenly, people who are humans, who are the same size as the humans actually watching the television, were on the television. They were doing stuff and you thought, I don't have to be 6'8", weighing 400 pounds and on steroids to entertain people, to be on that stage. How exciting is that? You could say that's ironic for a white middle-class British man to be saying on the stage. But actually, I want to see more diversity. I want more ordinary people out to do these things so that we all believe we can be doing that. And in the pro wrestling world, this was a game changer. A whole new audience was born in because they saw something that wasn't the same old S word. Sorry, Shay, I'll save that for you tomorrow. But also, the way that they approached the storytelling, the element they had, became less about a long and drawn out thing and more about an exciting short story. And they were telling it with new, I'm going to say agile again because I like it. Agile, agility. They were fast, they were fluid, they were still colourful, but it was exciting. Their relationship with risk changed drastically. One time, there was a big man named Brock Lesnar, and he tried this move on the WrestleMania stage. He's like 6'4", weighs about 300 pounds. Anyone know what happened to him?
Hospital.
He broke his neck. He actually avoided hospital because his neck is freaking huge. But the point is, different people with different skills can do different things. And sometimes the small person can do something better than the big person. Ooh, that's interesting. Let's go back one. See, I skipped too fast. What happened here, however, was those new and exciting and agile people were suppressed by the people on top. We had stories about companies being top-heavy, about the old people only wanting to do business as usual, the same old thing. And this is successful. Why would we change the way we've done it? This is the way we've been doing wrestling for 30, 40, 50 years. Don't you dare change the history. Because obviously we want to hear the same story week in, week out with the same actors. We couldn't possibly want a new actor or something new, would we? Would Harry Potter have been as good if Luna Lovegood didn't join? I don't think so. Tara wouldn't have been able to make her point about Dolores Umbridge. She was a wicked character, more ways than one. But what happened in World Championship Wrestling was that these wrestlers were awesome. And they were not appreciated in their workplace. And what happens when you're not appreciated in your workplace? Bye-bye. It just so happens to be another company that they were at war with who saw an opportunity. Oh, how handy. And they jumped ship en masse. There was a chap up here who very often isn't really spoken about. He's the one wearing the nice shiny shirt. And he's not talked about because he did a very, very terrible thing, but he's there for a very good reason, not associated with that. World Championship Wrestling became so unstable that they didn't even know who was under contract and for how long. And he was made their world champion because they realised everyone was leaving the day his contract expired. And so the following day, him and his friends turned up on the other television show. Brilliant. The other chap here is called Chris Jericho, and he is a pop star, and in his 50s he's more ripped than ever and still winning titles, which is kind of cool, I just wanted to tell you that. But what he did for a while when he jumped ship was he felt he had to fit in with his peers. Has anyone joined a job and they've begun to act like how they think they're supposed to? They see someone likes this thing. I like this thing. Oh, you're into automation all the time. I'm into automation all the time. You like fish? I like fish. It's just me. What he did when he joined the new company was he actually stifled his own style and everything that he was hired to do because he tried to fit in. He wore, inside his wrestling boots, platforms. We've seen the agility these guys have. Can you imagine trying to do that in heels? Madness. He took a while to settle in, but eventually he became the first ever undisputed, whatever that means, world heavyweight champion when the companies merged. What a turnaround. Now, leadership. We have Shay here on the front. Used to write leadership thoughts on LinkedIn. Good man. Up here we have an example of a few people who were given leadership positions. Some of them might look like they're wrestlers. And they were wrestlers who continued to be one of the boys. They were people who weren't actually qualified for a role. They didn't have business savvy. They didn't know how to work as a television executive. They didn't know how to make decisions that were going to hurt their friends for the good of the business. And some of them had contract clauses that told them that they could make any decision about how any story goes just because I'm one of the boys and I can. The man on the top right, by the way, made himself champion and he wasn't a wrestler. Interesting. So what he's doing there is he's completely disrespected his audience. Pro wrestling fans want to suspend their disbelief, but they don't want to see someone who isn't even a wrestler become their champion. We want to hate people in wrestling. Bad guys and good guys, yeah. But we want them to be wrestlers who can actually compete, so we can maybe believe that they could win a wrestling match. The company changed its leadership over and over again. It went through a merger between Time Warner and TNT. The target demographic that they were going for with their cool and edgy stuff was suppressed by the television network. Their finances were slashed and they were told to double their output. Happened to anybody? Anyone had their budget slashed this year? Yeah? You expected to do more work? Yeah. Anyone been a part of a reboot initiative in their company? Anyone find that your company then did a reboot initiative in their company soon after? What does it feel like to be bought in on some change that's really exciting, only for that change to be shoved in the bin? What do we do, Shane? Bye-bye. The wrong people at the top. I have countless examples of brilliant human beings that I have worked with. Humans that are supremely gifted at what they do, who felt that the only thing they could do to progress in their career is to become a manager. Scary face. And do you know what? They should never have been a manager. Some people should not have people reporting to them, and that is a good thing. This happened over and over again. People left because it was a toxic place, but then they were brought back because they didn't know what to do. Conflicts of interest happened all over the place, to the point where they were almost shut down, even before they were sold for a fraction of their value. This was a company that had everything, and lost everything. There was no awareness. There was greed. They actually named one of their last ever pay-per-views Greed. They weren't inclusive. They weren't looking to the future. They were blinded by one metric of success. So just a quick recap. Are we measuring the right thing? I want to tell you a story, just very quickly, about an e-commerce company whose name I shall redact. In 2016, they had a new group come in to create the regression pack. The regression pack to rule them all. The colour regression pack that you know, once you've got it, we don't need to do anything else, just run the automation, because nothing's going to change. They made a decision in 2016 that this little payment system called Apple Pay, it's an edge case. We don't need to add that to our regression pack, we'll just test it ad hoc every once in a while, that's fine. And nobody actually decided to review what was in the regression pack. They just ran it and ran it and ran it. They knew their measure of success was we passed this many tests, boom, ship it. Come 2021, hey, they had a sale. Get all the money, move to 6, 7 figures. Guess what broke? Apple Pay! Who's to blame? They're not there anymore. Measuring the wrong thing, we have confidence, we have complacency. if we are comfortable. Who feels comfortable when they know everything in the room? Everything in the room, you're the smartest person in the room. Do you want to be the smartest person in the room? Magnus does, that means the rest of us don't. Cheers. Who likes feeling challenged in the workplace? Who wants to learn? If we are not challenged, if we are not learning, if we are not growing, guess what the competition are doing? They are learning, they are growing. Oh my goodness, Netflix. That story is bonkers. What are they thinking? Remember the Kodak story, right? Kodak were #1. Now where are they? They've got rebranded televisions being made in China. Just says Kodak. I don't want a Kodak TV. They're meant to be #1 for cameras. Has anyone here been a new person in the workplace? That's a trick question. Have you been in the workplace and you felt like there's no career path, there's no journey, there's nowhere for me to go? I ask people, what happens here? And what are people saying when you say, why aren't we changing things? Yeah, it is what it is. Just, it's always been that way. What happens, Shane? Bye-bye. The good talent will always get work. The good talent are too good to not get work. Do you want to work with a good talent? If you know somebody who has budget, if you know somebody who has the ability to affect learning, if you are that person, invest in your people. Oh my goodness, because if you don't, they're going to go and thrive and leave you behind, my friends. And if you are a leader, or you know leaders, the ability to clearly, concisely and consistently lead your teams provides an air of stability that you won't get if you change your mind all the time. My eldest is on the autism spectrum, and if we change something without notice, what's going to happen? 2 weeks ago, a low-cost airline cancelled my flight at 11 p.m. when I was in the departure gate. My son had a panic attack. No human told us, by the way, only an app. Accessible, isn't it? Dealing with change is difficult for the best of us. But information and consistency and being able to explain why the hell you changed what you were doing is important. If we remove that from people, we are being exclusive in the worst possible way. WCW was super exclusive in the worst possible way. And that's why that thing that I love died long after I stopped watching. Now, there are many, many, many more stories I could have shared with you today. And please, if you want to talk about wrestling, you know, let's talk about wrestling, all the other things you saw. But I wanted to say a special thanks to a few different places. If you really do like wrestling, there's a book with a very familiar title just there. This man, Guy Evans, he spoke to TV executives. He got incredible detail on how tragically awful the measures of success went, not just in World Championship Wrestling, but across the entirety of Turner Network Television. People were actively encouraged to lie and hide their budgets and put them somewhere else so they could succeed. Eric Bischoff's ego hasn't got any smaller, and he has a podcast named after his 83 weeks of success. He tried to do the same thing in another company, kind of didn't do so good. And there's a few others there, YouTube channels, lovely throwbacks. And there is even, if you really care, my friends, a Testis and Wrestling Slack workspace. 7 people members, but and that, my friends, is where we are. Any questions? Let's go.
Big applause, thank you very much. much. We are having a few questions actually. Chris?
Sorry about the stuff. It formatted beautifully on Google. Not so much on PowerPoint. Who does that?
The first one, so who is your favorite wrestler and why?
Who is my favourite wrestler? I have two. One of them actually retired and came out of retirement, that's why I have two. My favourite of all time is a wrestler called Sting. He has the trademark for the name rather than that one, Geordie Singer. He is an ultimate storyteller. He could do more by standing in the rafters and just staring down and telling a story. No words. His presence enough helped tell a story. He was a genius at it. He came out of retirement in his 60s and he's still going. Can't quite do the same things, but the storytelling persists. But my other one is a guy called Christopher Daniels. He's one of these new up-and-comers. He actually came through just as WCW was about to die. And he was a super agile, super cool guy. And when I left my old company, they paid for a nice little cameo performance and he sent me a video. It's like my best friend.
Thank you. Many people feel they cannot leave their organization, yet they feel unsettled by changes. Do you have advice for someone in this situation?
Oh my. So a little bit of news I haven't told you is I quit my job 3 weeks ago. You can applaud, it's fine. Toxicity in the workplace, things that don't make you happy, things that bring you down, could affect the rest of your life. I had basically a permanent headache for a good 6 weeks. All of the extracurricular things that I enjoy doing with my lovely friends. And my beautiful family suffered. So, I spoke to my wife. And I kicked it to the park. And do you know what? The mental fog, it left. My headache left. Now, I don't encourage everybody to do these things without some sort of a safety net. No, they're just like, I don't like that, see ya. I had a long conversation, and we talked about money and things like that. But for me, for my mental health, for my family at that moment in time, it was the right thing to do. But I would say to you, if you are struggling with things in the workplace or in the culture, the best thing you can do is talk to people. But not everybody. I was in a situation, gosh, Russell, was it 6 years ago?
What situation?
Testing kids.
All right.
I was a testing leader in my workplace, and everywhere I looked was a dev leader, a product leader, a BDR. Nobody else had a testing hat on, and I felt very alone. And that's a very dangerous place to be. You can either go two ways. You can sort of just start to ignore everything, or you can go a bit rich with power in terms of the negative side of things. But I knew I needed accountability. I knew I needed to be challenged. I knew I needed to have some cool people to kick me in the ass if I wasn't doing things right. Sanity checks. Other human beings can relate to stuff that we experience, even if they haven't ever touched the software that you're talking about. Humans make mistakes everywhere. Culture goes around. Same problems. So I reached out to some other lovely human beings. Some of them are here. And I asked them to hold me accountable, to share with me, to help me be a better version of me, and we would do the same. That's the core principle of community. And a community doesn't have to be an intentional thing that you do that suddenly means you make a podcast. That's all Simon Prior's fault. What I really mean is, find people that you trust, people that you know aren't going to say yes to everything you do. You know, I don't know if you've ever received from somebody a "you got this" and strong arm emoji. When I'm struggling, I don't want someone to tell me that I've got it. I want someone to listen to me, to try and empathise with where I'm at, and maybe challenge me or kick me in the ass if I'm being stupid. I want to invite that, and I invite you to find people that you can trust. Friendship and community is so important in this workplace, and I don't mean quit immediately when you've had problems, but when it begins to affect your mental health, your time with your families and other things, what is more important? Work or life? We need to work to have life, sure. But find the things that you love. Find someone that loves you for who you are. Don't be a false version of yourself in the workplace. You'll get found out or you'll hate it, or both. So I just encourage you, talk to people. Come talk to me, talk to other people that you trust. Don't keep it to yourself, it'll eat you up inside. I'm an internalizer. I get anxious, I get ill. Speak to people, please.
Chris, do you have energy for one more question?
Yes, my friend.
Fantastic. What do you think about Undertaker? Do you like him? Could we learn something from him as a tester?
My goodness. The Undertaker is a pro wrestler, by the way. Not the guy that's taking you away for your funeral, in case you're wondering. Very tall man named Mark Calloway from Texas. He was an old school wrestler to the nth degree because he stuck to his character publicly for 30 plus years, which is really impressive if you think about it. In public, he acted like he was. People never knew what his real voice even sounded like in public, because he was just this slow-moving guy, and he'd do his moves and whatever. It was always very mystical. He used to make thunder and lightning come down to the ring and rain terror on people. But you know what? While he wasn't the greatest at it, he was one of the greatest reinventors. He changed his persona, he changed his stories, and I mentioned this not very long ago to Drag On. He had Limp Bizkit as his theme tune. You ever thought about what theme tune might work well for you? You know, when you come onto a stage. Limp Bizkit were of their time, right? They're very much not now. But he moved with his time. He even had Kid Rock, like he was quite eclectic with some of the things he had. But he reinvented himself. He changed the way that he dressed. He changed the music that he came to the ring with. He changed his moveset as his body adapted and changed. He stayed relevant whilst being different because he learned and he listened. And as testers, we need to do those things. And I was talking to Jeff a little bit earlier, and we actually say some of those good old things, they do actually come back. Some of those stories that we hear now, probably not these ones, Jeff, right? But some of these stories that we hear at this conference will have been talked about 10, 15 years ago. And that's because a lot of these principles are still relevant, but the way that we tell those stories and to whom we tell those stories changes. So in reality, what we can learn from the Undertaker, I didn't expect that question, is don't just think you've got it and retell the same story all the damn time. Find new ways to be relevant. Find new ways to stick to your core values, but to tell that story differently. Adapt and change your skills and your tool set. Don't push yourself beyond your boundaries. The guy got concussions too many times. Like, it was frighteningly scary to watch a man in his 50s not be able to do what he'd been doing for 30 years. And then that leads to the other point from the Undertaker: learn when the hell to stop for your own good.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone.
Wie viele Fragen waren gestaged?